Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive with us.
It's good to be back.
This time we're diving into the life and times of one Trevor Noah.
A fascinating guy, really.
We'll be taking a look at his book, Born a Crime.
And pairing it with a recent interview he did.
Now,
What makes his story so interesting
yeah,
is that it really transcends comedy, you know?
totally.
It's really a testament to resilience in the face of some pretty extraordinary challenges.
And to think, it all started back in apartheid-era South Africa.
Wow, what a time and place.
I know it's hard for many of us to even imagine.
Really is.
And that's where it all began for Trevor.
I mean, literally born a crime.
Exactly. His mother was black, his father was white.
Illegal at the time.
Absolutely. A relationship that was against the law.
Just imagine that for a second.
I know.
Growing up in a world where your very existence is considered wrong
It's hard to fathom.
shaped Noah's entire perspective.
But here's the thing.
What's that?
Noah didn't even realize how strange his situation was as a child.
Really? How is that possible?
Because of his mother, Patricia,
Oh, wow.
she completely shielded him from the really harsh realities of apartheid.
She created a safe world for him.
A loving world, despite the circumstances.
That just goes to show you the power of a parent.
It really does.
In this case, she literally crafted a haven for him to thrive.
Amidst so much injustice.
It's incredible.
But of course, we all know no haven is impenetrable.
Sadly, that's true.
Noah still faced a lot of challenges in his life.
What?
Well, violence from his stepfather
Oh, God.
and the trauma of his mother's shooting.
Terrible.
These events really impacted him deeply.
Makes sense.
So we'll dive into all of that.
Sounds good.
But first, let's start with apartheid.
Okay.
Because that was a huge part of his early life.
For sure.
And apartheid wasn't just some abstract political system.
No, it was part of everyday life.
It really was,
So Trevor was actually considered superior to his mother,
but inferior to his father.
all because of their skin color.
Unbelievable.
That's apartheid for you.
It's really hard to grasp all those little rules and nuances,
I know.
but they were devastating.
Absolutely.
His mother even disguised herself as a maid
What?
when they were out in public.
To avoid suspicion.
Could you believe that?
It's crazy.
And there's this story about his grandmother.
Oh, yeah. What about her?
She would lock him in the house
Really? Wow.
because she was afraid the police would take him away if they saw him outside.
So sad.
I know. And he actually believes that's part of the reason
For what?
why he's such an indoor kid even today.
Wow.
It's a good example of how much our early experiences can affect us.
I agree, even seemingly mundane ones.
Totally.
So we've got apartheid, and then there's the domestic violence, which
Wow.
Noah talks about pretty openly.
It does.
He witnessed his stepfather abusing his mother.
Sadly, he did.
And, he still goes to therapy for it.
He does. It's brave of him to share his story
It is for sure.
because it sheds light on a much larger issue. This idea that domestic violence is something we need to talk more about.
Especially against women.
It's true.
It often gets downplayed and silenced.
Exactly.
Like it's not a big deal.
It is a big deal.
We need to be talking about it more.
Agreed. And then we have this other event,
Which is,
the shooting
oh gosh, yeah, his mother getting shot.
by his stepfather.
That's right.
Can you imagine getting that phone call?
Horrible.
The thing is, Noah wasn't even surprised when he got the call.
How come?
He had this feeling like it was going to happen.
Really?
Yeah, he calls it his spidey sense.
His what?
His spidey sense from living in that abusive environment for so long.
So he was prepared for the worst.
But even with that, it must have been crushing.
Absolutely.
But get this, the bullet that hit his mother missed all the vital parts of her brain.
Really?
She survived.
That's incredible.
I know it's a miracle.
Definitely.
But even with that miracle, the justice system failed her.
How so?
Well, his stepfather only received a very lenient sentence.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's a disturbing pattern we see.
That crimes within families aren't taken seriously.
Exactly, like they're not as bad somehow.
So messed up.
It is. But even with all this darkness,
Yeah.
Noah's story is ultimately about forgiveness and understanding.
That's interesting.
He doesn't hide his anger.
Towards his stepfather.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He even talks about wanting revenge.
Wow.
But his understanding of forgiveness changed over time.
How?
Well, his mother played a big role in that.
What did she do?
She taught him that forgiveness isn't about condoning the act.
It's about letting go of the anger.
Right, it's about releasing yourself from that anger that binds you.
That's deep.
It's a hard lesson,
For sure.
especially when we're talking about the scars of abuse
Right, but it's about acknowledging the complexities.
and the trauma.
Exactly, because that's how we break free from those harmful cycles.
Now, let's switch gears a bit.
Okay, where are we going?
Noah has these really interesting observations about the struggles of young men today.
Oh, yeah, like what?
He senses a crisis of anger, isolation, and lack of purpose.
I've heard him talk about that.
And he connects this to bigger societal issues.
Like what kind?
Things like the decline of the middle class
Okay.
and the changing nature of work,
Interesting.
less traditional jobs,
I see.
and even the lack of traditional male bonding experiences.
That makes sense.
All of this contributes to this feeling that young men have.
Of being lost.
Exactly.
So what's the solution?
He actually makes this point about women having an advantage. Well, they've historically been excluded from the workforce,
Right.
which is obviously a bad thing.
Of course.
But it forced them to develop these skills.
Like what?
Connection and community building.
They have to rely on each other.
They did. They had to create their own spaces.
And build their own support systems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something to learn from that.
Interesting point.
And here's a curveball.
Oh,
Noah himself admits to feeling a lack of belonging.
really? But he's so successful.
I know it seems counterintuitive,
It does.
but he actually feels the most belonging when he's alone.
That's fascinating.
It really makes you think
It does.
about what success really means.
And what true belonging is all about.
Maybe it's not about external validation
Maybe it's about self-acceptance.
and finding that connection within yourself.
That makes a lot of sense.
And you know what his advice is for finding belonging?
I'm all ears.
He says, focus on what you genuinely enjoy.
Okay.
Find communities that share those interests
That's good advice.
and let those connections happen naturally.
And don't force it.
Exactly.
Just be yourself and see what happens.
And speaking of finding your tribe,
Yes.
Noah is a huge proponent of the power of friendship.
He really is.
He has this core group of friends,
Who have been there for him through it all.
thick and thin.
It's amazing.
I think his childhood experiences really made him appreciate those connections.
Makes sense.
He saw firsthand how important it is to have a good support system.
Couldn't agree more.
And he offers some really insightful advice about friendship,
Oh, like what?
like how to know if you're in a bad one.
Interesting. Tell me more.
He says it's not so much about the person.
It's about the dynamic.
Exactly. Can you be yourself around them?
Do they accept you for who you are?
Flaws and all.
That's what matters.
And he talks about how you choose your friends.
But you don't choose your family.
Right. It's a powerful reminder that we have agency.
We get to choose our chosen
And
family.
he says, choose wisely.
Because who you surround yourself with can really impact your life.
It's true.
It's like they say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Exactly. So choose those 5 carefully.
Now let's talk about his professional life.
Sounds good.
Specifically, The Daily Show.
When he took over from Jon Stewart, he faced a ton of backlash.
Really?
Yeah, death threats even,
No way.
and terrible reviews.
I can't imagine that pressure.
He even thought about quitting.
Seriously?
He did. But luckily, he had some great colleagues.
Who convinced him to stay?
Well, there's this story about Dan Amory.
The head writer.
Yeah, and he told Noah that if he left,
Yeah.
they might shut down the show,
Okay.
and then Dan wouldn't get his free lunch anymore.
Oh, Dad.
And then there's Jon Stewart himself.
What about him?
Well, he showed Noah this article
What did it say?
about how Noah was the worst thing to happen to America.
Ouch.
And then he showed him another article
Okay.
by the same journalist.
Really?
But this one was a few years later. And
Okay.
it was praising Noah,
Oh, wow.
calling him the heart of America and begging him not to leave.
Talk about a turnaround.
Right. It just shows how fickle public opinion can be.
It really does.
So Noah learned a valuable lesson.
Which is
Don't chase approval.
just stay true to yourself.
Exactly.
That's how you weather the storm.
And he also learned how important it is to have a good team.
To support you.
Because success is rarely a solo thing.
You need people you can rely on.
But even with success comes a price,
Doesn't it always?
especially when it comes to fame.
What do you mean?
Well, he talks about losing his privacy
Yeah, I can see that happening.
and how it affects your relationships.
Because people treat you differently.
Yeah, they project their own ideas onto you.
Makes it hard to be yourself.
And he tells this story about going to a theme park.
Sounds fun.
But it wasn't.
What happened?
He got the VIP treatment.
So he got to skip the lines.
He rode everything multiple times.
That's awesome.
But it was depressing
Really? Why?
because he realized that the real joy of a theme park
Yeah.
isn't just about the rides.
It's about the experience.
Exactly, the shared experience with your friends.
The waiting and the talking and the laughing.
Exactly.
And the friction.
What?
The friction.
What do you mean?
Well, there's this research that shows that a little bit of friction
Oh,
actually
right.
enhances enjoyment.
So like those little
So if
obstacles
we're waiting in line together.
actually make the experience better.
Exactly. It's about those little moments of connection.
And the everyday interactions that we share.
Yeah. Those are the things that make life rich.
So true.
And when you're famous, those moments become harder to find.
Because you're always being watched.
Like you're living in a fishbowl.
Exactly. It can be very isolating,
Even when you're surrounded by people.
which is why it's so important to have that core group of friends.
The ones who knew you before the fame.
The ones who see you for who you truly are.
Absolutely.
And going back to that feeling of not belonging,
Yeah.
Noah has this theory
About what?
about why men especially might struggle with it.
Interesting. What's his theory?
He thinks that men often have a hard time connecting with each other.
In a meaningful way.
Exactly. Like they don't know how to just be
They need an activity
or a purpose.
to bring them together. And he contrasts this with women.
Who seem to have an easier time connecting.
He even has an idea about why that might be.
I'm listening.
He says that because women were excluded from the workforce for so long,
Right.
they had to develop these skills
Of connection and community building. Exactly. They had to create their own spaces
to support each other.
because they weren't allowed in the traditional spaces.
Fascinating.
So maybe there's something men can learn from that.
Makes you think.
It does.
Now let's talk about his decision to leave The Daily Show,
It was a big one.
especially at the height of his success.
It shocked a lot of people.
I can imagine.
He said the pandemic really made him rethink his priorities.
In what way?
Well, he realized he was prioritizing work above everything else.
And it was costing him
Time with loved ones.
and other opportunities.
Exactly like travel.
Or other passions.
He was on autopilot.
Just focused on external success.
And he realized it wasn't enough.
He wanted more.
A richer life.
A more balanced life.
A life that was true to his values.
It's amazing that he was able to walk away,
It takes courage.
to leave something that's working so well.
But he knew that true success wasn't about external validation
It was about living authentically.
and pursuing what truly fulfilled him.
Good for him.
The one thing that really struck me about his story
What's that?
is his honesty about the challenges of fame.
It's not all it's cracked up to be.
It's not.
It comes with a price.
It does.
What's the biggest challenge?
He talks about the loss of privacy.
And how it affects your relationships.
Exactly. Because when you're constantly in the public eye,
People have this idea of who you are.
and it's hard to separate the persona from the real you.
It's like you can never truly relax.
And he tells this story about going to a theme park
Oh, yeah, that one.
where he got the VIP treatment
So he got to skip all the lines.
and ride all the rides as many times as he wanted.
Sounds great.
But he said it was actually depressing
Really, why?
because he realized that the real joy of a theme park
Yeah.
comes from the shared experience.
With your friends.
Exactly. The waiting together.
The talking, the laughing.
All of it.
Even the friction.
The what?
The friction
What do you mean? There's this research
Yeah.
that shows that a little bit of friction.
can actually make the experience more enjoyable.
You mean like the little obstacles?
Exactly, like waiting in line together.
It makes the payoff that much better.
Because you've shared that experience.
So it's not just about the destination
It's about the journey.
and the people you share it with.
And when you're famous,
Yeah.
those moments become harder to come by,
Because you're always being watched.
always under scrutiny.
Like you're living in a fishbowl.
It can be very lonely,
Even when you're surrounded by people.
which is why those genuine connections are so important.
Those true friends.
The ones who see you for who you really are.
And going back to that sense of not belonging,
Yeah.
Noah has this really interesting observation
About what?
about men in particular.
What is it?
He suggests that men often struggle to connect with each other.
On a deep level.
Yeah, they don't know how to just be with each other
They need an activity.
or a reason to be together.
I see.
And he contrasts this with women.
Who seem to have an easier time connecting.
Exactly. And he has this theory about why that is.
Tell me more.
He thinks that because women were excluded from the workforce for so long,
Right.
they had to develop these skills of connection.
And community building.
Exactly. They had to create their own spaces
Their own support systems.
because they weren't allowed in the traditional spaces,
And now men are struggling.
because those traditional spaces are changing.
Fascinating.
It makes you think
It does.
about how we can learn from each other.
Absolutely. Men and women alike.
Now, his decision to leave The Daily Show,
Yeah, that was a big one.
It really was.
Especially at the height of his success.
He said the pandemic really made him reevaluate his priorities.
How so?
Well, he realized he was putting work above everything else.
At the expense of
Relationships.
That's passions.
Everything else. So he decided to make a change
He did. He stepped back.
and reassessed his life.
And realized that he wanted something different.
Something more.
A richer life.
More balance.
A life that was truly aligned with his values. That takes a lot of courage.
To walk away from something so successful.
But he did it.
He did, and it's inspiring.
It shows that we have the power to choose.
To choose what truly matters to us.
And to create a life that we love.
Exactly.
Now, one thing that really resonated with me.
About his story
Yeah.
is his honesty about the challenges of fame. It's not all it's cracked up to be.
What do you mean?
He talks about the loss of privacy.
And how it affects your relationships.
Exactly, because when you're in the public eye,
You're always being watched.
people project their own ideas onto you.
It's hard to separate the persona from the real person.
And he tells this story about going to a theme park.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
He got the VIP treatment,
Ticked all the lines.
rode all the rides as many times as he wanted,
Sounds like a dream.
but he said it was actually depressing
What? Why?
because he realized that the true joy of going to a theme park
Yeah.
is the shared experience.
With your friends and family.
Exactly. The waiting together,
The talking, the laughing.
all the little moments.
Even the friction.
The what?
The
I
friction.
don't get it.
Well, there's this research that shows that a little bit of friction can actually make the experience more enjoyable.
You mean like the little obstacles?
Exactly, like waiting in line.
It makes the payoff better.
Because you've gone through something together.
It's not just about the destination
It's about the journey.
and who you share it with.
And when you're famous,
Yeah.
those moments become harder to find,
Because you're always on display,
always under scrutiny,
like you're living in a fishbowl,
which can be very isolating.
even when you're surrounded by people.
Which is why those genuine connections are so important.
Having those true friends.
Who see you for who you really are.
That's what matters.
Now let's go back to that feeling of not belonging. Noah has this really interesting observation.
What is it?
He suggests that men especially might struggle with it.
Why is that?
He thinks that men often have a hard time connecting with each other.
In a meaningful way.
Yeah, like they don't know how to just be with each other.
They need an activity.
Or a reason to be together.
I see. And he contrasts this with women.
Who seem to have an easier time with it.
Yeah. And he has this theory about why that is.
I'm curious, what's his theory?
He thinks that because women were excluded from the workforce for so long,
Right.
they had to develop these skills of connection.
And community building.
Exactly. They had to create their own spaces
Their own support systems.
because they weren't allowed in the traditional spaces.
Interesting.
So maybe there's something men can learn from that.
Makes you think.
It does. Now, his decision to leave The Daily Show,
Yeah, that was a big one.
especially at the height of his success.
It shocked a lot of people. Why do you think he did it?
Well, he said the pandemic really made him reevaluate his priorities.
In what way?
He realized he was putting work above everything else.
And it was costing him.
His relationships, his passions, his time.
So he decided to make a change
He stepped back from it all
and reassessed his life.
and realized that he wanted something different,
Something more.
more balanced, more aligned with his values.
It takes a lot of courage to walk away from something so successful.
But he did it.
And it's inspiring.
It shows that we all have the power to choose
To choose what truly matters to us.
and to create a life that we love.
Exactly.
Now, one thing that really stuck with me about his story
What's that?
is his honesty about the challenges of fame.
It's not all it's cracked up to be, is it?
It's not.
There's a price to pay.
There is.
What's the biggest challenge in your opinion?
He talks a lot about the loss of privacy.
And how it affects your relationships.
Exactly, because when you're in the public eye,
Everyone has an opinion about you.
it's hard to separate the persona from the real person.
You can never really let your guard down.
And he tells this story about going to a theme park.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
He got the VIP treatment,
Skip all lines.
rode all the rides as many times as he wanted.
Sounds pretty awesome.
But he said it was actually a depressing experience
Really, why?
because he realized that the real joy of a theme park
Yeah,
is the shared experience.
with your friends and family.
Exactly. The waiting in line together,
The anticipation.
the talking, the laughing.
All those little moments. Even the friction.
The
The friction.
I'm not sure I follow.
Well, there's this research that shows that a little bit of friction
Okay.
can actually make an experience more enjoyable.
You mean like those little obstacles?
Exactly, like waiting in line together.
It makes the payoff so much better.
Because you've gone through something together.
Interesting. So it's not just about the destination.
It's about the journey.
And who you share it with.
And when you're famous,
Yeah.
those moments become harder and harder to come by.
Because you're always on display.
Always under scrutiny.
Like you're living in a fishbowl.
Which can be a very lonely existence.
Even when you're surrounded by people.
Which is why it's so important to have those true friends.
The ones who see past the fame.
And love you for who you really are. Now let's revisit that feeling of not belonging.
Okay.
Noah has this really interesting theory.
What is it?
He suggests that men in particular might struggle with it.
Why is that?
He thinks that men often have a hard time connecting with each other.
In a meaningful way.
Yeah, like they don't know how to just be present with each other.
They always need an activity.
Or a reason to get together.
I can see that. And he compares this to women.
Who seem to have an easier time with it.
They do. And he has this idea about why that might be.
I'm listening.
He thinks that because women were excluded from the workforce for so long,
Historically,
they had to develop these skills.
Of connection and community building.
Exactly. They had to create their own spaces.
Their own support systems.
Because they weren't allowed in the traditional spaces.
And maybe now men are struggling.
Because the world is changing.
And those traditional spaces are evolving.
It's an interesting perspective.
It is.
It makes you think.
About how we can all learn from each other.
Men and women alike.
Absolutely. So it's really about internal validation more than external.
Yeah, maybe true belonging comes from within.
Exactly. Finding comfort in your own company, being content with yourself.
There's a whole bunch of research on that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. All the benefits of solitude.
For creativity.
Self-reflection, all that good stuff.
And it makes you wonder, if all those external things, like fame and fortune,
Right.
do they really lead to belonging?
Maybe not.
Maybe true belonging is something deeper.
More about self-acceptance.
Connecting to your values and passions.
Exactly. Finding your tribe.
Those people who really get you.
Ones who celebrate your quirks.
Your individuality, all of it.
And you know what? Noah has some great advice for dealing with loneliness.
Oh, what's that?
He says, focus on the things you enjoy.
Okay.
And then seek out communities that share those interests.
Find your people.
Exactly. And speaking of finding your people,
let's talk about friendship.
One of Noah's favorite topics.
Because he has this really tight-knit group of friends.
Who have been there for him through thick and thin.
His anchor.
He actually compares friendships to piggy banks.
Piggy banks?
Yeah. You invest your time and effort.
Okay.
And every so often you get to break it open.
And enjoy the treasure.
Exactly.
I love that analogy.
It's a good one.
Because it highlights the difference between those transactional relationships.
And the real deal.
True friendship.
It's a choice.
You choose your friends.
You don't choose your family.
Right. Is powerful.
It is.
And he gives some tips on how to spot a bad friendship.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
He says it's not so much about the individual.
It's about the dynamic.
Exactly.
Can you be yourself around this person?
Do they accept you?
Flaws and all.
If not,
red flag.
Time to reevaluate.
Agreed. Now, let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And talk about his decision to leave The Daily Show.
A bold move.
Especially at the peak of his success.
Why do you think he did it?
He talks about how the pandemic changed things for him.
Made him realize what was really important.
He realized he was putting work above everything else.
Missing out on life.
Time with loved ones.
Other passions.
He was on autopilot, Just
focused on that external success.
And it wasn't enough.
He wanted a richer life.
More balance.
More aligned with his values.
It takes a lot of courage to walk away from something like that.
It does, but he did it.
And it's a good reminder for all of us.
That true success isn't just about external validation.
It's about living a life that's true to you.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about fame.
Okay.
Because Noah's pretty open about the challenges that come with it.
It's not all glitz and glamour.
Not even close.
He talks about the loss of privacy.
And how it affects your relationships.
Makes it hard to connect with people.
Because everyone has an idea of who you are.
It's like you're always performing.
Never really yourself.
He tells this great story about a theme park experience.
Oh yeah, the VIP treatment.
He got to skip all the lines.
Rode all the rides as many times as he wanted.
Sounds amazing, right?
On paper.
Yeah.
But he said it was actually depressing.
Really? Why?
Because he realized that the real joy of a theme park
is the shared experience.
With your friends and family.
The waiting, the talking, the laughing.
All of it.
Even the friction.
The what?
The friction.
I'm not sure I follow.
Well, there's this research that shows that a little bit of friction can actually make an experience more enjoyable.
Like those little obstacles?
Exactly. Waiting in line together, complaining about the heat.
Makes the payoff that much better.
Because you've gone through something together.
You've shared that experience.
It's not just about the destination.
It's about the journey.
And the people you share it with.
That makes a lot of sense.
And when you're famous,
yeah,
those moments become harder and harder to find.
Because you're always being watched.
You're always under scrutiny.
Like you're living in a fishbowl.
It can be very isolating.
Even when you're surrounded by people.
Which is why it's so important to have those true friends.
The ones who see you for who you really are.
The ones who knew you before the fame.
Exactly.
Now, you know how Noah talks about that feeling of not belonging?
Yeah.
He has this really interesting observation about how that might be connected to the way men are socialized.
What do you mean?
He suggests that men often struggle to connect with each other in a truly meaningful way.
Like they don't know how to just be.
Exactly. They need an activity or an external purpose to bring them together.
They're not as good at just hanging out.
And sharing their feelings.
He contrasts this with women.
Who seem to have a greater capacity for emotional intimacy and connection.
And he has a theory about why that is.
I'm all ears.
He postulates that historically, women, due to their exclusion from the workforce, were almost forced to develop those skills of connection and community building.
They had to create their own spaces of belonging, their own support systems.
So while that exclusion was obviously unjust,
of course,
it might have inadvertently fostered certain skills that are now proving beneficial as women are rightfully entering the workforce in greater numbers.
Exactly, and perhaps men now navigating a changing social landscape might be feeling a bit lost, unsure of how to cultivate those deeper connections.
So what's his advice for men who are struggling with isolation and loneliness?
He suggests starting with activities you genuinely enjoy and then seeking out communities centered around those interests.
So if you love gaming, join a gaming group.
If you're passionate about photography, find a photography club.
The key is to connect with people who share your passions.
Exactly. From those shared interests, genuine friendships can blossom.
Find your tribe.
And, he often refers to his close group of friends as his core group.
The ones who've been there for him through it all.
Offering unwavering support and inspiration.
And those are the real MVPs.
And he emphasizes that true friends are those who allow you to be your genuine self, who accept you unconditionally.
You're the ones you can call at 3 a.m. during a crisis.
The ones who celebrate your victories and comfort you in your defeats.
Now, remember that thought experiment we touched on earlier?
The eraser test?
Yeah, the one about whether you'd erase all the difficult experiences from your past if you could.
Noah's response to that is pretty powerful.
What does he say?
He says he would erase it all.
Really? But he's achieved so much.
I know it seems counterintuitive considering he's often praised for his resilience in the face of adversity.
But he challenges that notion that we should be grateful for our suffering.
That our pain somehow defines us.
He says just because you've weathered a storm doesn't mean you should want to keep that storm.
It's a profound statement that goes against the grain of the often romanticized narrative of overcoming adversity.
He acknowledges that we can learn and grow from our difficult experiences.
But we shouldn't feel obligated to hold on to them as if they're badges of honor.
It's about acknowledging the pain, processing it, and moving forward.
Not clinging to it as a defining characteristic.
That's a really healthy perspective.
It is. It's about recognizing that we don't have to be defined by our past.
We can choose to heal, to grow, to move forward.
And it's not about forgetting the past.
More like reframing it.
Finding a way to integrate those experiences into who you are today.
It's funny you mentioned reframing.
Yeah.
Because you brought up this concept that Noah learned about in Japan.
Oh, yeah, kintsugi.
What was it again?
It's the art of repairing broken pottery with gold.
With gold.
So they don't just try to hide the cracks.
They actually highlight them.
They make them part of the beauty.
It's like a metaphor, isn't it?
It really is.
For how we could approach our own brokenness.
For wounds or scars, all of it.
Instead of trying to pretend they're not there,
we embrace them.
As part of what makes us whole.
Unique, beautiful.
It's a powerful way to look at it.
And Noah's story is more than just his personal journey.
It's an inspiration.
A beacon of hope.
For all of us.
It shows that we can overcome incredible challenges.
And find joy and meaning even in the darkest of times.
It's a testament to the human spirit.
Our ability to not just survive,
but thrive.
And I think one of the biggest takeaways from his story
is the importance of self-knowledge.
Being willing to look inward.
To explore your own thoughts and feelings.
And to seek help when you need it.
There's no shame in that.
It's actually a sign of strength.
And it reminds us that mental health is just as important as physical health.
We need to take care of both.
Absolutely.
And another theme that runs throughout his story,
Is the power of connection,
whether it's his mother's love
his close friends,
or the community he finds in his work.
he shows us how vital those connections are.
We're not meant to go through life alone,
We need each other
to support each other,
to lift each other up.
and to remind us that we're not alone.
And what's really amazing is how he blends all of this into his comedy.
It's not just about making people laugh
It's about making them think.
and feel.
He uses humor to connect with people
From all walks of life.
and to spark important conversations.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the life and lessons of Trevor Noah,
What are some key takeaways for our listeners?
well, I hope this inspires you to embrace your imperfections.
Remember, Kintsugi,
Those cracks and flaws are part of what makes you beautiful.
don't be afraid to be vulnerable.
Share your struggles with people you trust.
Seeking help is not a sign of weakness.
It's a sign of strength.
And prioritize those meaningful connections in your life.
Your friends, your family, your community.
Those are the people who will be there for you through thick and thin.
And finally, give yourself permission to disconnect from the noise.
Take a break from the news cycle.
Find moments of peace and quiet.
Reconnect with the simple joys in life.
Remember Noah's decision to leave The Daily Show.
It's a powerful reminder that external success doesn't always equal happiness.
Sometimes you have to step away from something good,
Let's pursue something even better.
something that's truly aligned with your values.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, keep growing.
And most importantly, keep diving deep.
Until next time.